President Obama's first visit to Canada as U.S. President. Good morning and welcome back to the CTV NewsNet special. I'm Brad Giffen. So good to have you here this morning. It's a very exciting time. We're going to be joining the main CTV network with Lloyd Robertson at the top of the hour for the arrival of Barack Obama. First, though, in Chicago, I'm joined by Andrew Bush with BMO Capital Markets, and in Hamilton, Nick Bontis, a strategic management professor with the DeGroote School of Business at McMaster University. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. It's so good to have you here this morning. I want to start first with the same question to you both. Mr. Bush, begin with you. As President Obama and Prime Minister Harper meet, in terms of economics, where do you believe Canada and the U.S. agree, and where do you think they differ?
Well, certainly they agree on getting the U.S. Energy supplies. I think that's a common area that they can certainly have a lot of talk about. But also, clearly, the recession in the United States is a central point of their discussions during their working lunch. I'm sure they're going to review this and probably touch upon, I'm sure they're going to touch upon, coordinated efforts for bailing out the auto industry. So a lot of areas, a lot of great touch points between the countries. And this is really a first for a president. We haven't had a U.S. president go to visit Ottawa on his first foreign visit in quite some time. So I know Canada is very excited about it.
So where are the rub points, do you think, in this relationship that's growing now?
Well, certainly the tar sands and the environmental issues that are there. I think there's flags being unfurled right now so that President Barack Obama can see them on his way into Ottawa from all of the environmental groups saying, you know, stand tough up to the tar sands. But the fact is that the United States needs this oil, but they certainly need to work with Canada to coordinate environmental policies that work from the framework of the Kyoto Accord. So we'll see. This is certainly a much different president than the last president we had in the United States, and he's certainly a lot more amenable to working with Ottawa on these types of issues.
Your thoughts, Mr. Bontis, the synchronicity between the two leaders and the differences. What do you think?
A couple things. I think the critical issue on both sides of the border, of course, is confidence, or the perception of confidence. So the stimulus package that was just recently announced, if you look at some of the details, in the U.S. they announced about $48 billion in infrastructure construction projects. That was very, very similar or synchronous to the U.S. federal budget. We had about $12 billion in shovel-ready projects. So we know that construction or the development of infrastructure will help boost some of that confidence. We also saw good investments on law enforcement, so policing and security at the local level and at the state level is important both in the U.S. and Canada. In terms of differences, being an academic researcher, I did notice, and of course Obama's a former academic himself, there is a very significant investment in scientific research on the U.S. side, whereas on the Canadian side there was a reduction of about $150 million in terms of tri-council or academic research funding. So those are the similarities and differences that I saw.
Yeah, talking about that scientific solution perhaps to the tar sands that may come out of eventual talks, if not today. Mr. Bush, much has been made about the so-called Buy American provisions in America's stimulus bill, but President Obama says there is no way his country is going to turn away any trade when global trade, particularly with Canada, has never been more necessary. Comment on that.
Well, certainly, I think many Canadians are concerned about President Barack Obama, specifically because when he was campaigning in Ohio and Pennsylvania, he made some references about tearing up the NAFTA agreement, and that really certainly shook up our trade partners. That, of course, I think was just campaign rhetoric, but the Buy American component of the stimulus plan is really, I don't know why it's in there. It's such a tiny component of what the overall plan is, and it really is just kind of a pledge to U.S. steelmakers that for some of the infrastructure projects that they'll go to the U.S. steelmakers first. It really is such a dangerous path to go down for a number of reasons, and certainly harkens us back to the 1930s when the U.S. enacted the Smoot-Hawley tariff bill that was a complete disaster and aided to the Great Depression. I don't think that's going to happen this time. But, I mean, just for instance, in the EU, they're having a meeting very shortly about discussing these types of trade protectionism and stealth trade protectionism that's occurring. And that's certainly that worries people in Canada. And I think rightfully so, Stephen Harper is going to bring this up in his meeting with President Barack Obama.
Do you think it was possibly this Buy American cause was some assurance to those Americans in the Rust Belt states who had voted probably somewhat reluctantly for Barack Obama, not really knowing what was to come. They perhaps voted Republican all these years. Now suddenly there's a Democrat that they're voting for. Maybe this was a reassurance to them that they had done the right thing.
Well, you know, the thing is that what we're seeing in the United States, because of such high job losses, we're seeing a lot of populist rhetoric go through the country. I would say, you know, President Barack Obama's first press conference beating up all the banks in the United States is a great example of that. The CEO's appearance before Congress is another example of it. And generally, populist rhetoric leads to really bad policies. And I think that trade protectionism clause in the stimulus plan is a great example of that. So I hope it doesn't continue. I think cooler heads will prevail. I don't think we're going to get much more of this stuff coming from the United States.
Mr. Trabant, I want to make sure I include you in the last words here. Add to that, if you will, or take it in a different direction for a few extra moments that we've got now.
Sure. I think both gentlemen have the expertise and are sophisticated enough in terms of economics to appreciate the faults of protectionism. So I agree with that commentary. I mean, protectionism typically has short-term protection, you know, with the anticipation of long-term gains, and that never, ever pans out. So, you know, protectionism in the long run leads to mediocrity. And I think if you want to drive innovation and productivity, which both gentlemen want to do, they need to, you know, take that element out of the equation.